I call to order the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers on July 13, 2017. All managers are present except Manager Shackleton and Manager Miller. There is a member of the public here to address the board. We'll move along to approval of the agenda. We can strike the second item under 8.1, which is the policy and planning committee report. And is there any other change anyone wants? May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Manager Rogers, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Olson, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Under information items and correspondence, we have the PMLM first quarter update and the Arden Park project status briefing. I thank Laura Dundownchik and Renee Clark for those updates. In addition, the correspondence this period included a letter from the City of Mound noticing their intent to amend their wellhead protection plan. I passed that letter along to the administrator. Under the consent agenda, there is one item, the approval of the minutes of June 22nd, 2017. And a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Manager Rogers, is there a second?
Second.
Awesome. Point of order, Mr. Welch.
Mm-hmm.
There were 4 managers present at that meeting. Can we all vote in the minutes?
You
Or
can.
only those who were present?
No, any manager can vote on any item before the managers.
All right, thank you.
We'll have a chance to read it. So.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda is approved. As I was looking over my calendar to give my report, I realized it's been more than a month since I was here. That's never happened before, so I guess I was on vacation. I was, since the meeting of June 8th, I have attended the Arden Park community meeting and the MAUD special meeting and summer tour, and I intend to be at the next 2 50th anniversary events, possibly Arden Park event next week and Metro MAUD on Tuesday. 2 reminders that we have Watershed Bureau nominations are due in by the 21st of July. I know we all got an email from Ms. Mayak about that. And comp plan comments, of course, too. For comment, we also can look that over. And then I have two Metro MAUD items to mention. One is that next Tuesday, the topic is going to be what we as Metro Watersheds want from MAUD, and that will inform the executive director search that they're going to be undertaking. So just if you have thoughts, pass them on. And I propose that we rotate attending MAUD. We have 7 managers and a district administrator. The 8 of us would, if they have quarterly meetings, so they're a 2-year cycle. Nobody powers. I'll make that happen when we make a schedule. Manager Olson.
It still is open for those of us who want to regularly attend?
Absolutely. And there was all 7 of us could go and they wouldn't
Okay,
bark.
thank you.
Any manager can attend. That is what I have, and I have asked Manager Olson and Manager Robbins if they will weigh in on reporting on the special meeting and summer tour, which we attended so long ago. Gosh, was it 3 weeks?
Well, I'll start then. Okay, we had a really good summer tour this year. We were up in Bemidji at a brand new facility adjacent to their new convention center, and we were able to tour the CCC camp up there and go through all the forest locations where they've got the dams holding up the headwaters of the Mississippi and things like that. So the Army Corps of Engineers hosted some of the visit and some of the tour, and it was just a really well-run opportunity for all of us to see a lot of the things in action up there. The other thing was that the purpose of the meeting, or the goals of the meeting, was to change some of their bylaws, as well as some of their operating procedures, and the solution that they would like to do as the current administrator retires, and he is also the lobbyist for the organization, is that they'd like to hire a full-time administrator and a part-time lobbyist to represent the MAUD group. And they needed to have an increase in dues. Now, we as a group took a look at a variety of options, low dollar commitment, medium dollar commitment, high dollar commitment. And at the meeting, they explained that that was just too much information. They really meant to have that low dollar commitment. And so it passed with flying colors. It was all but, I think, 4 hands. And the group went privately and met with those 4 hands to address the issues from their geographic perspective. It was a lot of deep concern about making sure everybody was pleased with the outcome. But it was one of the most prepared and well-organized meetings that I've attended, because they had done all of the groundwork to come up with this new administrator position and this new organizational structure, and everything was on hold until we had that vote. And so it was very impressive, and it was very obvious in the way that the enthusiasm of all the affirmatives went through. I mean, there were hands up everywhere. And normally that could be a little contentious at those gatherings in December. So.
And that was with the $7,500 dues cap.
Correct. Correct.
Did you want to add anything, Commander Robbins?
We had some interesting things that we saw on the bus tour. And, Bill mentioned that CCC camp. That was more of a history thing, but it kind of got blended into what the Corps of Engineers activities were up in the northern part of the state back in the 30s, that really kind of tied into the Mississippi watershed and navigation on the river. It was pretty interesting how far back that goes now. But we also, this is just kind of an aside, we heard some talks on recent research that was being done by the biology department up at Bemidji State. One of the things was beaver habitat and its effects on fish spawning in northern Minnesota lakes. And it was, they talked about the fact that they had too few beavers, and they had to parachute beavers in to supplement the...
Well, I know a couple they could have down at our cabin.
You can do a relocation.
Jeez.
Well, that's crazy.
I've never heard of that.
That was the most amusing thing that I heard, except for the discovery that white pelicans are now coming into northern Minnesota. They haven't migrated this far previously, and they've discovered that the white pelican has a distinct preference for walleye pike over other rough fish that they might encounter. So it was just something that amused me. But otherwise, it was a great get-together, I think.
And they concluded that they had a negligible effect on the population of walleye, which was something people were asking about. Those are interesting stuff.
They also mentioned that in some areas, when the pond wasn't large enough, that the dams that they would create would prevent fish from their normal migration. And so you'd get a concentration of one type of fish in that restricted water area. Whether that be good or bad, it could go either way. So having enough ability to move between bodies of water is important. So there's the downside of it. They're studying to see if that actually can affect what fish are where. It's quite interesting.
It's a damn question, right?
Yep.
Thanks very much. The upcoming meeting and event schedule is printed in the agenda. And we are now at item 9.1, the E-grade update on hydrology and groundwater. Ms. Christensen and Mr. Bishop.
Hi, managers.
Yeah.
We're here today to present an update on the Ecosystem Services Assessment Program, or E-Grade for short. The development started in 2014, and we've been coming to the board every 4 to 6 months with updates. This is how it's progressing. I'm going to do just a quick overview of the program, and then Joe's going to provide the update on the hydrology and groundwater section. So in 2014, the board recognized that the district needed to characterize ecological health and approved the development of the E-Grade program. In February of this year, as part of our strategic plan, the board reaffirmed the need to have characterizing our ecological health as part of our R&M's purpose. So the reason we came up with this new tool, the E-Grade program, is because our old way of doing this was lake grades, and lake grades don't tell the whole story. So with this, we were only looking at the nutrient cycling piece, which is an ecosystem service that nature provides for us for free. And we are only looking at the services on our landscape for deep lakes. With this E-Grade tool, we're now going to be able to use not only nutrient cycling as a service, but also habitat diversity, biodiversity, flood control, recreation, and groundwater supply. And not only are we going to be able to look at this service on the landscape for deep lakes, but we're also going to have it for our shallow lakes, our wetlands, streams, and uplands. So to make sure that we are in line with the district's guiding principles, we are making sure that the E-Grade tool is based on sound science. We're not reinventing the wheel. We use ecosystem models that are already in place and adjust them to the district. We are also utilizing our technical committee that are composed of our local, state, and federal agencies. And we are using their help to build this tool and then also use the existing tools that are out there. So the program framework, right now the ecosystem services will be assessed at each landscape for each of these services. And then we're going to move it up to a sub-watershed scale. And then once we get all of our 11 sub-watersheds assessed, we will then go up to a watershed scale. So the targeted sub-watersheds are 6 Mile Creek, Shuts Lake, and Minnehaha Creek sub-watersheds. And we chose these because there is some diversity in each of these systems. So 6 Mile Creek is a rural area with development. Shuts Lake is just a one-lake system, and Minnehaha Creek is an urban system. So the timeline for this, we are just finishing up phase 1. We just have some reports that need to be put out for these 4 landscape types, and we are currently in phase 2. So hydrology and groundwater interaction with phase 1 landscapes and uplands are currently being worked on. We are, tonight, like I said, Joe is going to be presenting the hydrology and groundwater piece. And then, so the whole development of this program is going to be completed at the end of this year. And in the beginning of 2018, we will be putting out reports for the 3 sub-watersheds. So with that, I will pass it over to Joe. And he can tell you a little bit more about the uplands. Or not, sorry, the uplands, the hydrology, and the groundwater.
Either way, I can just do it this way. So thanks for having me. This has been an interesting and challenging project to try to figure out how do we make sense of developing a health scale that makes some sense within the framework of management and activities that you do as a watershed district and make it usable across from communication to planning and implementation. So when we went through this, and I'm going to skip this slide where I talk about this. When we first started this process, we wanted a framework that made sense on a national scale. One of our charges was to make sure that it wasn't just for Minnehaha Creek, that we could compare it on a national scale. So we really went with this ecosystem services framework. And the ecosystem services framework has really been embraced worldwide. We base it, the wheel of that show you earlier is based off the United Nations approach to ecosystem services. Now there's 32 services or something like that in that wheel. So we boiled it down to make it more manageable and some of that kind of piece. So we boiled it into these here: flood control, nutrient cycling, biodiversity, habitat diversity, recreation, and groundwater supply. So these are really the ecosystem services that we took out of that program, that we said we're going to focus on these and really figure out how do we grade it on that kind of basis. So then we started asking the question and started looking into the literature to figure out what's the right way to do this, what's the right framework to make this usable. And we went with what we call a stressor response gradient. So this is something that the PCA is using. They call it a biological condition gradient. And what you see on the graph here is as stress, which is on the x-axis there, as stress increases, the condition of the biological community decreases. The quality of that community decreases, right? And so it's just a stressor response curve. As you increase stress, you see a measurable response into some parameter. In this case, biological community, but we've extended that to some physical conditions too, that as you stress a watershed, you're going to see some changes in that. So this is a nice framework, because all the work that's being done by EPA and other people that are out there uses both these approaches. The state of Minnesota is using reference condition. They say we look at a biological community that's healthy, we look at the conditions that stress it, and then we compare everything to that. So this allows us to do that. We can use a reference condition for high biological condition and compare it. Well, we don't always have those reference conditions. So the other way to do it is do what a doctor does. He says if he's looking at your symptoms, how is that stressing something out? So if they're interested in your heart and the health of your heart, they look at your cholesterol and all these things that they know will stress the health of your heart. So it's the same thing here. We can look at stressors. So we set the framework up in a way that gives us the flexibility to use both approaches. We can embrace what the state and EPA are already doing and use both approaches in that framework. So we had to take this. There's 6 conditions here that the states defined based along that stress, and we had to boil it down, and we said we wanted something a little more manageable. So we came up with 4 classes. And I can tell you we've had long discussions with the TAC about what terminology to use for these 4 classes. And what we've settled on is very boring, but descriptive. But it's been an interesting process. But we've just come up with exceptional, good, poor, and degraded. So this is what I'm going to show you when we start to rate all these watersheds, how this starts to break out on these 4 conditions. So exceptional means that we're near reference conditions or show low levels of stress, right? So if we're using stressor as our indicator, it shows low levels of stress, which means we should have healthy conditions. If we have reference conditions at low levels of stress, we would compare to those reference conditions. And then as you go down to good, you're beginning to show signs of that stress. Poor, obvious signs of the stress where you're degrading the community or indicator. And then degraded means that it's pretty far gone, highly stressed, and not the condition that you want. So this is the framework that we are working in. Ecosystem services compared along a stressor response gradient that gives us flexibility to embrace what the state's doing, what the EPA is doing. Okay? So that's the framework that we set up. So the other thing we wanted to do was we know there's a lot of regulatory hurdles coming for the district down the pike. PCA is working on things in secret that they will pop on you before you know it. And so we really wanted to dive in and see if we could get out ahead of some of those things. Some of these things are, they're going to list lakes for biological impairments, right? So they're going to come in and look at your fish community and they're going to look at your plant community, say it doesn't meet reference conditions, you now have an impaired biological community. They haven't started that process, but they're developing the tools for that. So we've embraced those tools as much as we can into this program, which makes E-Grade a regulatory tool for you to get out ahead of this. So when PCA comes to you and says, oh, you have biological impairments, we can say, oh, we already know that. And here's what we're doing about that. Here's how we've set up our framework to address that.
Quick question, your index of biological integrity, who writes that standard?
It depends. The Pollution Control Agency is developing it with their own staff, using the Midwest Biodiversity Institute for streams. So they do it for fish and macroinvertebrates and streams. The DNR is taking the lead on the plants and the fish. Okay. They're doing it as a service to PCA, so it's an interagency kind of program.
Okay, thank you.
So we've embraced those, and then we've looked at some of the things that EPA is doing. EPA right now is on a national wetland condition assessment program where they're trying to figure out how do we assess the condition of wetlands on a nationwide basis. We've been in discussions with them, embraced a lot of their approaches, used some of our information. So again, we're aligning with some national databases that we can use for reference conditions and understanding, and aligning with this scientific movement that EPA is working on, right? They're going to advance the science here. We want to set ourselves up to be able to embrace those advancements as much as possible. So that's our framework. These are our tools. We're using these indices. So how does this work? And we've talked about this on some of them, but I'm going to walk you through where we're at with hydrology. Hydrology, so when we ask hydrology, we want to ask the question, if we look at a watershed, how do we say that it has a healthy hydrology or not healthy hydrology? Right? And so the first thing to do is to do that on an ecosystem service basis. We broke it into two things. And for lakes, we said, do they support flood control? Because that's a big part of the district's management focus. And how would they do that? Well, if they do support flood control, they would do that by storage. So we looked at what % of the annual runoff gets stored by the lake. And then we set some breakpoints for that. Those breakpoints would be, if it's exceptional, it can store more than 140%. Now, for lakes, we can't look at lakes alone. Wetlands also provide the same storage. So we've combined lakes and wetlands together. They're in one piece together. So what I show you is going to be actually lakes and wetlands in terms of that storage together. Okay? Then when we said good was 100 and 140%, poor was 50 to 100%, and degraded was less than 50%. So then we wanted to ask for lakes, what's a healthy hydrology for lakes? And this was a tougher one. And we came up with lake level fluctuation. A lake that bounces very extremely would not support habitat as much. Well, when we got into discussions with the DNR, they were kind of like, this is really a legal quagmire if you're not careful about lakeshore management. And they really suggested dropping that. So for now, we put that to the side. We're not gonna approach that. We're not gonna look at that, just because we don't want to get into that framework. Okay, so let's look at flood control for the watershed in terms of storage. We broke it into management units because you can't look at one lake alone. It's really done in management units. So we took each of the watersheds. This is the Minnehaha Creek. We broke it into management units. These are kind of bite-sized chunks. They align with the stream process that we're doing, so each chunk has a reach that's associated with it. And then 6 Mile Creek was broken into management units based on the diagnostic work and planning that's going on there. So we can look at this and we can say in 6 Mile Creek, which is what you would expect, it's actually good to exceptional in terms of flood storage. It's out there. Makes sense, right? There's not a lot of development. A lot of the wetlands are still intact. There's a lot of storage. There's lots of lakes to store the water that goes in there. So it does a good job for flood storage. Now, when you get down into the lower part where there's more development, it goes from exceptional to poor, or I'm sorry, exceptional to good. So it's still good, but you see some of those loss of wetlands and loss of storage in that watershed. Now, you can probably guess what we're going to see next when we see when we see Minnehaha Creek. It's going to look a little different, right? Now we've got a lot of those impacts of lost wetlands. And in those lost wetlands, we've lost a lot of that storage, which means this can contribute to flooding issues. Okay? And you see it coming all the way down the creek, that we've just lost a lot of wetlands. We don't have the storage that's there. Now that doesn't mean we can't control flooding, right? It just means that the watershed itself is not providing that ecosystem service without an engineering approach. We've engineered our way out of a lot of these flooding issues, right? By piping it, by straightening channels, improving drainage, and then now more green practices. We've been doing more infiltration on the landscape, abstraction through green roofs and tree trenches. So we got to think about this, how we manage it. We're not going to go and put wetlands back on the landscape for that storage, but it does give us kind of a management direction, or supports your management direction of green infrastructure to make up for that loss of storage. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about lakes in terms of their contribution. Now we can get into streams. Streams, we asked two factors here: flood control and habitat diversity. Flood control, we said it has to support conveyance without causing flooding issues. So it's kind of a weird metric that we came up with, but I think it works, and it's the number of structures in the 100-year floodplain. So this just says if you built into the conveyance area of the stream, that's going to cause flooding issues, and so the watershed itself is not supporting flood control in terms of conveyance. And then for habitat diversity, we selected stream flashiness index. There's a really good paper out there that looked at how extreme changes in the stream happen. So a high flashiness index means it goes up and down really fast. A low flashiness index means it has a long hydrograph like you'd expect in a natural watershed. So we're able to use that paper, use the flashiness index to look at that. So this is flood conveyance, this is Minnehaha Creek, and what you can see is, some parts of the watershed. The yellow is where there are structures in the floodplain, and this is actually the official delineated floodplain. In 6 Mile Creek, we don't have that. We just have a 100-year flood elevation. So it shows you where some of those issues are and where it's not supporting that. Again, the indicator here says that we have issues with conveyance. Engineering your way out of it is probably the way to go, because you're not going to change some of the other aspects of the watershed. And then when you get into 6 Mile Creek, it's what you'd expect for the most part. It's pretty good. And you can probably guess the one that's in the good condition, which issue is driving that. It's the Zumbro Lake flooding issue, right? So there's some structures in the floodplain around Zumbro Lake. I know you've had some discussions around that. That's what's driving it in that one. And then for habitat diversity, this is using the flashiness index. Again, with a lot of the storage in the watershed that's going on in 6 Mile Creek, it flattens out a lot of those rating curves because it changes the timing of the water going through there. So it's in good shape, good to excellent shape. And not as bad as you would think for Minnehaha Creek. Obviously along the main creek where there's a lot of pipes coming in, that flashiness index can go higher, but when you look at the Minneapolis chain of lakes, there's a fair amount that's been done to reduce that flashiness. Now this one includes any engineering that you've done to knock those peaks off, because it takes the hydrograph to calculate the actual index. Okay, so it's a measured actual condition that goes in there. For habitat diversity, I didn't get that in the table. Sorry about that. We also looked at habitat diversity from what we call ecological base flow. Ecological base flow is how well does groundwater support maintaining stream flow in those really dry periods. Because for biology to have healthy condition, they need to have a wetted width and a certain depth over a certain period of time, right? If the stream gets too narrow, you're limiting the biological habitat. If it gets too shallow, you're limiting biological habitat. So we used a metric where we looked at the impervious area and a 1,000-foot buffer. Because what's driving, and we looked at the study that was done by the U for Minnehaha Creek to figure out what's driving base flow for Minnehaha Creek. And it really was infiltration within 1,000 feet of the stream. So we just said as you amount of impervious area in that stream corridor, you're going to reduce infiltration, which reduces the amount of base flow that you can support. We're exploring one last piece to this, which is how much wetlands are actually in there, because wetlands can store it longer and they can offset some of that impervious area. So we're trying to ask the question, can we figure out if there's wetlands in there, will that offset it, and can we use that in our grading to kind of balance that out? There's also questions from Met Council about green infrastructure. If there's green infrastructure in there, how do you account for that? Unfortunately, we don't have an inventory of green infrastructure in these areas, so it's hard to account for that now. But that's something that could refine this process moving forward. And 6 Mile Marsh is in great shape because the lakes are connected. It's not developed in those areas. It's mostly wetland areas that are connecting these lakes where those streams are. So it supports base flow. There tends to be water in those streams throughout the summer. Now, the last thing that we want to talk about is groundwater. We always knew groundwater was a bit of a long shot into what we would do for groundwater, but we wanted to at least take a peek at it while we're going through the process. So we looked at the watershed for deep aquifer recharge. So this is down into the Prairie du Chien and the Jordan aquifers. These are the primary aquifers that supply water in the Twin Cities metropolitan area. Minnehaha Creek is connected in only a very couple really small spots to the groundwater, deep groundwater. So we kind of said, we're not affecting the deep groundwater and water supply for the whole Twin Cities metro area because we're not connected to those deep aquifers. So we kind of put that aside. So we're not going to do anything with that deep groundwater aquifer. And then we said, okay, so for lakes, what happens with lakes and groundwater? Most of the lakes, we looked at them, are flow-through lakes, meaning that groundwater enters from one side, exits through the other side. Okay, because they're flow-through, they're not impacting groundwater supply, they're not impacting that shallow groundwater, which is what we're talking about now. So we said, I'm not going to do anything for groundwater for lakes. Wetlands, we looked at the MICRAM data, and the MICRAM data showed very few of the wetlands in your watershed, which this really surprised me as recharge wetlands, meaning there's very few wetlands that are actually supplying groundwater. They're mostly discharge wetlands. They're just places where water's coming to the surface out of the groundwater. So because of that, wetland management, there's nothing you can really do to support groundwater supply through wetland management. The only way you would do that is if they're recharged and you want to make sure they stay there. So the recharge wetlands that you have, you do want to protect those because those are the few areas where you can get water supply back in there, other than upland kind of stuff. But there wasn't enough there to make it a grading scale, so we put that one aside. For streams, we address that in ecological base flow, because ecological base flow is dependent on good groundwater supply to support the base flow during those low flow conditions. So we felt like that was already assessed. Those two are kind of one and the same. And then uplands is still under development. I think most of the supply of shallow groundwater in the Minnehaha Creek watershed in the West Metro is through soil infiltration through your uplands. So this is where you get into Minnehaha Creek. There, you know, with all the impervious that's in there, you are starving the groundwater to some extent without that infiltration piece. So that's what we're exploring in the uplands piece, is how do we start to figure out how much are we starving at, how much infiltration is needed in those watersheds to support healthy shallow groundwater, and where is it needed? If it's 1,000 feet from a 10,000 feet from a stream versus 1,000 feet, is that more important? So that's what we're looking at for that piece. So just one last little piece to show you how we're organizing the information. So if we get back into the 6 Mile Creek Management Unit, we have all these features. We have uplands, streams, lakes, and wetlands. And so we need to start to figure out how do we start to bring this together. Well, this is just a bar chart, and I know it's kind of hard to look at. It's a lot of different colors. But it basically says for each of those, along the x-axis there, we have biodiversity, habitat diversity, nutrient cycling, and recreation. We have it for deep lakes in the left-hand side, then the next set's the shallow lakes, and then we have the flood control for the watershed. And what this allows us to do is to look at all the lakes in the watershed as a whole, to say how are they functioning. So you can ask the question, the most important thing to support good ecological health in a lake is good water quality. So how are we doing for nutrient cycling? Well, when you look at the bar in deep lakes and shallow lakes, we're not doing that great, right? There's about more than half the lakes are considered poor or degraded in terms of nutrients. Now, it's not so bad in that you look at the shallow lakes, about half of them are meeting that. So you've made progress over the years in improving water quality, which will support those other pieces. But when you look at biodiversity and habitat diversity, they're almost all degraded. Almost all the plant communities and fish communities in your lakes in the 6 Mile Creek are showing high signs of stress. And so you can ask the question, why is that? Well, one of the things we looked at for habitat diversity was shoreline health. So you can go and look at that piece, and I'll show you that in a minute. So when we look in Minnehaha Creek, the gray bars are just areas we didn't have data, so we didn't have data for every lake. You see a lot more degradation. This is not unexpected. There's a lot more development. It's a lot denser impervious surface. We know that these lead to a lot of these degradations. But almost 75% of the lakes lacked almost all the lakes lacked habitat diversity, and more than 75% lacked any kind of biodiversity. Meaning the plant communities have been driven, and the fish communities have been driven to more monotypic, stress-tolerant communities. So how do we start to break that cycle and use this tool to track that? So that's kind of how we're looking at that. And then if you want to dive down in later, for those of us that are nerdy enough and want to know specifics, you can start to figure out what do I need to do, or what does the board need to do as a policy to start to drive change for some of these things. So if you want to improve, say, biodiversity, how do you start to drive change? The first thing you can say is, do we need some kind of shoreline program to improve shorelines? Well, if you look in the Schuts and 6 Mile, almost 80 to 90%, looks like 90%, were actually healthy shorelines. Yeah. So in there, it's protection, right? It's how do we protect the shorelines that we have because those supply habitat. When you get into Minnehaha Creek shoreline, about half of it's degraded. So is that the major driver? Or you can look at, was it our floristic quality, and then you can look at the stressors associated with that floristic quality. So I just want to give you a sense of how we're starting to really picture driving this together to help with all the different aspects. We can use it as a communication tool. You can use it to show all your lakes as a group, but you can also use it to set policy, to set planning activities, how do we start to affect change. And this is all tied into the advancement of sciences and the other agencies, so that as they start to understand how we impact our communities better, it feeds right into your system. You can drive it that way. That's kind of the context that we're trying to set up. So the next steps, we're eyeball deep in trying to get the reports out to the TAC to get submitted for review. We'll have those done. Streams and wetlands will be done by the end of July. In August, we'll focus on completing the uplands report, so that by September, we're going to really be trying to tie it all together into the big picture. How do we start to communicate it? It's very technical right now, as you can tell. A lot of these indices are very technical. how do we start to communicate it in an understandable way to really paint the picture of what the condition and health of the watershed is. That's really kind of that next step. And then by November, December, our role will kind of step back, and the district staff will take a lead role in trying to paint out how do you do report cards or whatever they're going to be, and we'll just be there to support from a technical side how to get that stuff generated. So we just have some budget to do that. So that's kind of the last steps.
On your bar graphs, how often will they be upgraded? Updated?
What our plan is right now is to have our sub-watersheds on 3-year rotations. So with the next set coming up next year, after that 3 years of assessment, then we'll hope to have that report out the following year.
Because not only will the bars move as we either improve or affect things, but we can also see trends in the other direction too if there's something
Yeah.
that's causing bigger
Yeah.
problems. So it'd be nice to be able to see the delta in between
Absolutely.
in a future layout.
Yeah, and the EPA's National Lake Assessment did a really good job of showing that delta. So they've
Okay.
been exploring some visual ways that we've been looking at on how you show that change in a visual
Great.
basis.
Thanks.
What's the cut line between what's a deep and shallow lake?
Sure. We use the PCA's line, so anything less than 15 feet max depth or more than 80% of the lake is less than 15 feet. As a shallow lake manager, I always say it's more of a continuum than that. For regulatory purposes, you have to put them in a box, but there's deep lakes with shallow lake characteristics and shallow lakes with deep lake characteristics. Follows more in a gradient.
So it sounds like the 6 Mile Partnership Group was really interested in having this all finished up, and that'll be after around New Year's.
Yeah, we'll be wrapping it up at the end of the year, and then the report, depending, once we get everything all together, the report will probably come out, we're hoping early spring, possibly late spring. So working with Telly and her group to, like you said, come up with some way to present this to the public in a way that they'll understand and be helpful on their part, as well as part of all this being worked together with planning and the rest of the staff to see what kind of things out there that we need to maybe look at, investigate more, or say this is really a good place that we should be protecting or improving.
Mr. Witzke?
I've got a question for Joe. As compared to our existing level of monitoring and sort of broad system assessments, how many new parameters are we proposing to evaluate under E-grade as compared to today? And of those new parameters that we're collecting, how many is the district going to have to collect versus its partners?
Through the process, we've been very sensitive to that, to not try to create whole new programs and lots of monitoring associated with that. So we've tried to find state-driven programs where they're collecting a lot of the data. So for things like the lake fish IBIs, the DNR was already going to come in and do those calculations, do that fish monitoring, especially for lakes that they manage. Now, they don't manage every lake, so it would, there's the lakes the district would have to fill in.
The district with about 1 to 2 weeks at the most, really.
Okay.
I mean, 6 miles where we really pick it up, but otherwise the rest of the watershed, the DNR is covering it.
But there are some areas where, so wetlands, we are proposing some new stuff. Now, it's what the PCA is already doing, these rapid flourished quality indices, but to go out and do it for every wetland was not feasible, because it takes time, and that costs time, costs money. So we did that on a population basis. So we took a subset that describes the populations of wetlands throughout the watershed, the same way that the EPA does when they say we want to assess the lakes in the United States. We're going to take a subset and use the statistical, the central tendencies of that to describe the whole population. So we've taken that approach too to try to save some money. So then you can use this program as a project comes up, or say a developer is going to come in and they're going to go impact 200 wetlands or whatever it might be. You can work with them to get the RQA done at that time and kind of piece this all together. When you update MICRAM, they visit the sites anyways. It's not a bunch of additional work to do that. So we've tried to set it up so that that database grows organically with the programs and approaches that you're already doing. So we've done our best to set that up.
All the other new parameters the district already knows how to do and does do, which
Right.
wasn't doing on a rotational basis as the E-grade program. The wetlands is really the only thing that would be new for staff.
And then the other part of wetlands is we did do soil chemistry, which is new. Even the EPA is scratching their head what to do with it on a national wetland condition assessment. But we think the biogeochemistry of wetlands is a really key factor that moving forward, and this is what I'm calling an emerging issue, that this legacy phosphorus that's built up in all these wetlands is going to need to be addressed. So we're trying to put you on the forefront to understand the level of an issue that this might be, so that as you move forward, you can understand it, get out ahead of it, and address it. That's where we're trying to position you. The science isn't there yet, but we're trying to position you on that cutting edge of science so that that happens.
Annabeth?
For your groundwater assessment, did you have data on metropolitan subsurface aquifer delineation?
We did. So we had Metro Model 3, which Bar Engineering did for Met Council. And so we've talked to them and we've looked at a lot of that information as a part of that process. It's not easy to get into it though. It's a pretty complex model.
Right.
Mr. Welch, you have a question on the face.
Yeah, I have a question in my mind, and it's kind of a question, it's kind of a framework to look at what these guys are doing for the board, and so I'll just try to articulate it as best I can. The district has never been shy about getting data and being assertive in gathering data on water resource issues, and that continues here. When you start to talk about programs that PCA is building in their black box in the basement of Lafayette Street headquarters, the legal counsel starts to get more interested in what that's going to mean for the district. And there's a benefit to the data that the district has been very clear that it wants. There's a cost to being, for lack of a better description, the guinea pig and being the first ones out because, oh look, they've got all this data, let's go use them because they have what we need to do. So then the district ends up innovating on behalf of the state, for the state, and then everybody else kind of piggybacks. So it's not really a question, if you have a comment about that and whether you guys feel like that's a risk, but it's a thing for the board to keep in mind as it budgets, as it programs.
Yeah, my comment to that is we've been very sensitive to what data you're already collecting, not creating new programs or putting yourselves in putting the district in a position to where I think it would cause problems. We've tried to set it up to where you're positioned to be out ahead of these issues. So there's always a risk in being out ahead and being the guinea pig. I agree with that. But the regulations, I don't think, are going to be any different for Minnehaha Creek necessarily. And I would argue, this has always been my philosophy, is you're better off being in that process of developing those programs and developing those regulations and being out in front of it. So you have your input at that time than it is reacting to it. So I think it's better to be proactive. I think that's what we're trying to set it up for. Now, it's just a framework to allow you for that. If you don't want to deal with that, it stays in the background. We haven't created this whole new data set that wasn't there before.
This is for the board. Have we ever, when I look at this, we're going from a method we used to use to grade lakes, which was pretty simplistic. We had some key indicators, and if those indicators passed, it was a great grade for that lake. This is a very thoughtful, comprehensive, lots of data result. Have we ever talked about publishing this as a standard that other watersheds could use throughout the state?
Ms. Dooley Christensen, do you have?
I mean, yes, it's been talked about. I mean, we built it on a national scale to allow it to be used elsewhere.
Okay.
We just haven't gotten to that point yet. We're trying to wait till it gets all complete.
Well, I know we're still got our training wheels on and we're trying to measure things.
But again, I mean, we can't force other watershed districts to use it, but it's there. So
Are we publishing it when we're done?
I believe that's the plan, these reports, these larger technical reports are going to get published.
Great.
we would like that scientific input to go through a publishing process and get that rigorous scientific review, so we definitely would like to.
Great.
To approach that.
Thank you.
Mr. Earl?
I think just to add on that, the other thing is that I think the DNR and the PCA have some other similar models that are at a different level of resolution. So we're kind of just really cranking up the level of resolution down to the sub-watershed and even the management unit level here. So there also are some other models that this kind of fits into that can be layered for other watersheds used to.
Okay.
Mr. Meehan?
To build on the black box concept, because I guess that's what we do. Another advantage about being upfront, we saw this with the TMDL programs, is that by having at least identified the data and knowing what your issues are, you are a front runner then for funding that comes along with it. So as you start to look for different projects and different activities in these watersheds, by having this data, you are at the forefront of getting and going in for grant applications and funding opportunities. So while there's some cautiousness there, we saw it when we put a lot of the TMDL programs in and the Clean Water Legacy dollars came out, is that put other entities that had that information out front to get a lot of that funding that come along with it. So yes, there's cautiousness, but there's also opportunities it creates at the same time.
I feel like the district's being in a position to be getting peg on the metrics that the state and the DNR put together. They already did their guinea pig testing to create those metrics, so we are really just actually utilizing those metrics to collect data. So I don't feel we put the district in a position to be guinea pigs.
Are there other questions? Measure Watches?
Thank you. My question is less scientific, and I'm hoping just for the benefit of the public that might be watching tonight, if you could talk about the previous comment about the complexity between the old system, or the increased complexity from the old system to the new system, and whether you've checked in on kind of the, I don't know, public's affection or attachment to the letter grades, A through F, and how you manage the conversion to a different grade, and you know, just kind of your approach to that.
Right, that's going to be a challenge because some people they go to that every year as the late grade, and if it changes even by one grade, they get totally upset and ask what's going on. It's like, it's okay. That's something we're really going to have to try and be careful with, and that's why we're going to work closely with Telly and her group and come up with the best way to communicate. We've already started that with kind of doing a preview of E-Grade through our website and through flyers when we have our events, but really working with our communications department and trying to make sure that we approach this the right way so people aren't upset about losing the late grade, and making them understand your late grade is just basically your clarity and your, you know, and with zebra mussels coming into Minnetonka, that's a great example. It's like you're getting really good grades on one side of the lake, but that's because you have this infestation of zebra mussels that is cleaning it up. So it's not necessarily making your lake better. I mean, it's in one way it is, but another way it's affecting your food chain. You know, people recreationally wise, you're having issues with that. So trying to take their view a different way, a different approach.
Just to follow up with that manager office, board of managers, there is definitely an appetite for a more complex grade. It may not be public-wide, but there is an appetite for it. And we know we're going to have to dumb it down, I guess to say, or make it less complex for the public. We know that. And not only working with Telly on the Communications Education Department, we were also going to roll this through the CAC to get their input, their input, and then probably do some testing before we actually roll this out.
And you're not going to lose all those years of grades, right? And is there any way to single out on your bar chart just the nutrient cycling?
Yes.
And apply the old model?
Yes.
For them to say, this one bar still would put you at this letter until they kind of get used to the exceptional, good, poor.
And you can
because that kind of
you can label
visually shows them they're really focused on one of 4 areas, and we can still tell you, you know, green exceptional is A, would have been A, right? And we can label that for you for a while until everybody kind of gets used to it.
And I think it's important to let them know that was developed in the 80s. It's very outdated.
Everything
those-
good happened in the
Well, you-
80s. I don't know what you're talking about. That's not an argument against things.
I'm kind of there with you, so.
Right, I know.
But it is outdated, so I think that's part of the message here too. Is this is an outdated system. Certainly, we can keep getting, but it's time. Our level of understanding how lakes work and function, our sophistication with this system has grown so much in those decades.
Yeah.
It's time to take that.
I kind of like the idea, though, visually, of putting what it would have been on a grade just in that one bar so that people can
Yeah.
see.
Sure.
You can label
You're
it.
looking at one of four things, and this is what it would have been.
Had we
Not
gone
that that's
this
your
way.
focus,
Yeah.
but as long as it isn't distracting from
No.
the goal of what you're trying to accomplish,
No,
which
we-
is worthwhile.
We always knew there was going to be a transition period and have it show the old with the new. And the more the complexity of it allows residents who are really interested, like associations, for example, to be like, what can we do? Okay, look what we can do. Maybe we can talk about shoreline. And
Yeah.
that's where I put it in. So.
You can even label that traditional column old archaic way, new really effective way.
Yeah.
But by having both through a window of time, 3 to 5 years, people will stop looking at the old and look at the new one.
And you know who I think will be interesting, or very oddly interested, are realtors.
Yes, we already are.
Yeah.
Right?
Love it.
You know, it's one thing to say this is an exceptional lake. Well, anyone can write it's an exceptional lake. It doesn't, you don't need to have anything backing you up to say that, right? But to say it's graded as an A quality lake is a different assertion than to just say, come buy this property on an exceptional lake.
Right. And
So I'm curious, they might be your most vocal group.
And Lake Minnetonka, currently, we don't have that on our list to do for quite a few years still. So maybe it's just that slow
I
transition.
think even the chain
that-
of lakes is pretty
yeah.
competitive with that,
Yeah.
with
So
lake grading.
we'll have the, 6 Mile Lakes and Lake, Minnehaha Creek Lakes
Yeah.
starting that way. So maybe by the time it gets to Minnetonka, it might be a little bit easier of an adjustment for them.
I could start realtor support groups and
Yeah.
you could teach the other realtors how to handle it. I anticipate they will be your group.
Because we actually have over a dozen grades just for Minnetonka alone.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
We have over 27.
27. 27 different grades depending on what bay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so that will be changing as with our, we presented months ago that we are decreasing the number of bays we're monitoring on Lake Minnetonka, so that will impact the lake grades. So
Yeah.
it'll be a slow transition.
Mr. Whisker?
One more question for Joe. Keep going from Joe. And it's not about chili. Presumably this is a little bit more work than kind of how we've run the monitoring program in the past, even though we're not collecting all the field data because we're relying on partners to provide us some of the parameters, whether it's Fish IBI or what have you. Has WANC and the district looked at yet the incremental additional cost and staff time we're looking at collecting, analyzing the information, producing the reports? Do we have a good grasp on that?
My answer is I don't, because it's not part of our scope of work. I mean, we try to be sensitive as we've developed it, but we haven't actually done any cost estimates about that.
District staff has, and we do have cost estimates for the new monitoring and the staff hours. I don't have it off my head, but we do have that as part of our budgeting purposes for 2017 and 2018. We have predicted that.
Are there any other questions? Well, thank you very much. It's always gratifying to see how well it's progressing. Going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Research and development report and management system demo.
I don't have any with me today.
Now that we have our attention.
Yeah. So I want to just thank you guys for allowing me to come to speak. Since 2006, the research and monitoring staff has come and presented our annual report to the Board of Managers. So this is sort of an annual tradition. This is going to be focused solely on our lakes and streams. We're not going to focus on E-grade since we just had that presentation. And I'm not going to focus on AIS, just what's going on in our lakes and streams. And then a quick demo of the Whiskey Data Management System at the end. So program purpose, review program purpose, review the 2016 conditions, notable results by subwatershed. So I'm not going to talk about all the subwatersheds. We have 11. It'll be too crazy. Not everything is, now subwatersheds have something exciting going on. And then impairments, and then the whiskey demo. So as you, this past February, you supported or approved the strategic plan, and the research and monitoring program purpose, as Yvette had mentioned earlier, is to characterize ecological health, diagnose drivers of change to drive implementation, collaborate on management plans, communicate results, manage and control AIS, and promote research. So I'm here tonight to communicate results. So what were 2016 conditions? It's been a year. Sometimes we have short-term memories of what last year was like. So I want to show you some pictures of the watershed. So the left-hand side, this is both images are from the Grays Bay Dam looking at Minnehaha Creek. The left side is 2015, March 2015, and the right side is March 2016. In 2015, the dam wasn't even open yet, and so we already have water flowing out of the dam in 2016. So these are the same location near the end of the season, and in both images the dock is underwater. But one took place in October and one took place in December. So we had more water flowing through the creek in October than we did in October of 2015. So what does that mean? Well, it means that 2016 was the wettest year on record. We've been experiencing high water years since about 2012. Well, if you recall, we didn't actually have any major flooding in 2016. And why was that? Well, it depends on the quantity of rain and when the rain falls. So in this graph on the bottom of the slide, your light blue bars are the 2014 precipitation events at the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. You'll notice that we had a pulse of rain in April and in June. But in 2016, the amount of rain was spread out throughout the year. So it really depends on that when we get the rain. So how does that impact our water bodies? So now I'm going to talk about the notable results. And how I set this up is that I'm going to go with our smaller subwatersheds. I'm going to go essentially west to east as the water flows. So this subwatershed, for the next couple of slides, I've grouped, for the next couple of slides, I'm going to talk about a couple of the minor subwatersheds. So on the key, the colored, the minor subwatersheds. So we'll start off with Langdon Lake subwatershed. In the map there, on the right-hand side, that's Langdon Lake. And we have a stream monitoring station that captures what's coming out of Langdon. And we did trends on the discharge through that station, so how much water is flowing through there. And the trends are showing there's actually a statistically significant trend on the amount of water is increasing. We're getting more water. But it's actually improving in terms of water, or improving in terms of the amount of phosphorus coming through there. So more water, but less phosphorus. Why? I can't tell you yet. That's all I know. We'll be looking into that. What's going on upstream of that whole system? What's happening in the upper part, prior to up on Langdon Lake? Well, we can be looking into that. So same thing in Dutch, looking at Dutch Lake subwatershed. So this is Dutch Lake. We have a stream station just downstream of that, and that flows into Jennings Bay, which is one of our impaired water bodies on Lake Minnetonka. And we're also seeing statistically significant improvements in total phosphorus. So again, less phosphorus coming through that system. And then Schutz Lake. This is the Schutz Lake subwatershed. The lake itself continues to fluctuate between meeting and not meeting the eutrophication standards. Why is that important? Well, the lake is not impaired yet, so it's hovering around the bubble of actually becoming impaired. The MPC won't actually consider evaluating the lake for impairment until 2020. We have some potential time. So in 2015, it did not meet the standards, and in 2016, it did, except for chlorophyll, did not meet the chlorophyll standard. So we did some diagnostic work upstream of the lake, did not find any major findings. So we are working with the City of Victoria and Wank Associates to help us create a P model. We got the board's approval to do that work. So we want to know, is internal loading or external loading the greater source of phosphorus? So now onto our larger sub-watersheds that drain into Lake Minnetonka. So here's 6 Mile Creek sub-watershed. Those are all of our monitoring stations as of 2017, moving forward. But prior to 2017, we've done a lot of data collection for the 2017 Watershed Management Plan, for the CARP study, and for E-grade. So all of that data analysis, we know a lot more about what's going on, and that's actually helped drive implementation that Anna Brown is working on. Yes, yes, Mr. Olson.
Can you define anchor lake stations, anchor stream stations?
Yes, so those are the stations that are from 2017 going forward are going to be used to assess long-term change. Before 2017, we had all the lakes we were using to consider that. So now we're just using those stations to consider.
So those become the anchors, okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
So Turbid Lake, so we did statistical analysis on our water quality data on our anchor lakes, and Turbid was not an anchor lake. This is prior to 2017. Remind me, this is 2016 data, but showing continued degradation in water quality, and Zumbro Lake is showing continued improvement in water quality. And those are statistically significant trends. The rest of the lakes in that sub-watershed, they're sort of just flat. No major improvements, there's no major degradation. Another thing I want to point out is in the 6 Mile Marsh, the data we collected there, Wank was able to model and determine that it's a sink for total phosphorus, but it's a source for orthophosphate, which is a soluble form of phosphorus that algae love, which drains downstream into Halstead's Bay and makes all of those beautiful algal blooms, and is one of the major reasons, most likely one of the reasons, the Halstead Bay isn't bare. So we now know we need to address internal loading in that wetland complex to help improve water quality in Halstead. So now Painter Creek, the watershed. Those are all of our stream stations in 2016, and I want to look back at 2014 quickly. Remember we had that pulse of rain in April and June? Well, in 2014 we saw phosphorus loads double at all of our stream stations due to that pulse of rain. But in 2016, with the water being spread out, the phosphorus loads in this watershed were just above the average, 10-year average, excuse me.
So more water spread out, less impact.
Less pulse.
Wow.
But downstream of Painter's Marsh, loading doubles, no matter what. We always see loading doubles. And then in Thies Lake, it's a lake that has not been meeting the standards for the past 3 years, so most likely will be evaluated for impairment. And what's important back to the Painter Marsh area is that we know the Army Corps is going to be coming in and doing some wetland restoration. Planning's been working with them on that, and so having that CPO4 station is a really good project effectiveness station. And one other thing to point out quickly is that CPO4 is sort of the hotspot. The downstream stations, we just see the same amount of phosphorus coming through, so we know it's pretty much right after Painter Marsh, or right upstream of Painter Marsh. All right, so Long Lake Creek sub-watershed. I'm going to quickly just get to our map here because I realized I could really say what I had on the slide. So you have 5 of your 7 lakes in the sub-watershed are impaired. Tanager, Long, Woolsfield, School, I think that's 5. Yeah. Oh, and Holy Names. Sorry. Dickey's, this lake right here, it's only exceeding the total phosphorus standard. So we have to do some investigation of why the phosphorus is off the radar, but everything else is fine. We know from the TMDL that Long Lake is impacted from everything upstream. So we decided to expand our monitoring efforts and go upstream and figure out what is going on. Another thing to point out is that because Long Lake is impaired and it's having impacts from upstream, upstream is impacting it, it's receiving these nasty, or it's having these nasty blooming algal blooms in late summer all the way and throughout the winter. as that picture was taken in November. So that's coming right out of the lake.
Can you show us where that is on the lake, where that outlet is?
It's right here.
Okay. Thank you.
So this is some preliminary results. We recently, as through an email, just shared this with planning. So this is pretty preliminary. So we looked at Spring Hill Tributary, Holy Name Lake Tributary, and School Lake Tributary. So this is this year's data. This is not 2016, this is this year's. All three streams or tributaries are sources of phosphorus, but the Spring Hill Tributary has a low amount of water flowing through it. So it doesn't have high phosphorus loading. The reason why we checked that out is because there's a golf course there, and the residents were concerned the golf course was impacting the lake. Of the three tributaries, it's not the one we want to focus on. We're going to continue to monitor it to just get baseline, because, like we said, water can be spread out throughout the year. What happens if we get a pulse of water at the end of the season? We want to know what happens what it does when that happens. So, Holy Name Tributary, it is the highest loading so far in terms of phosphorus, and that's just looking at February through June. And we think because the School Lake Tributary has School Lake, Krieg Lake, and Woolsville Lake to hold back the phosphorus, to act like the treatment basins. So the School Lake Tributary has less phosphorus loading into Long Lake than the Holy Name one, but it's because of those treatment basins. So our job now is to continue to monitor, to assess some of these stations, move and pick new stations, and maybe even do some wetland coring to determine what wetlands or sinks are sources of phosphorus. So sort of what's going on right now. So I just showed you all of the upper watersheds, sub-watersheds, and now I want to show you how they impact Lake Minnetonka. So this bar graph shows phosphorus loading into Lake Minnetonka from Painter Creek, 6 Mile Creek, Long Lake Creek, and then a combination of the 6 smaller streams. And you can see the legend there on the top. Painter Creek is your most polluting loading in terms of phosphorus to Lake Minnetonka. If you combine all your 6 smaller streams, they're going to come close to exceeding Painter Creek, 6 Mile or Long. And then again, you can see that pulse of rain we got in 2014, how it impacted the phosphorus loading into our creeks, which impacted Lake Minnetonka. And then again, 2016, with the water spread out, you saw it's just above the 10-year average. So, I put on this map Long Lake Creek, Painter Creek, and 6 Mile. And you can see the receiving bays for those creeks are impaired. Well, now you know why they're impaired. They have some of the highest phosphorus loading coming into them. So they act like treatment basins to protect the rest of Lake Minnetonka. Not only, but also they also have some legacy phosphorus from those sewage treatment plants back in the 70s. So to explain the rest of this map, because there is some good news in Lake Minnetonka, so we divided Lake Minnetonka into 3 groups. Group 1 is the bays that have algae that zebra mussels love, that will thrive off of. And then group 2, it's like, it's a good source of algae, And then group 3, they don't have good algae. Not a good food source for zebra mussels. So in group 1, the trends are showing statistically significant improvements in water quality. In group 2, we're seeing in Crystal Bay, right here in Spring Park, statistically significant improvements in water clarity. So as zebra mussels move east to west, we're seeing improvements in clarity. And then no improvements or no trends in the group 3 bays, which is not surprising, except for PV Lake, which is having degradation, statistically significant trends in degradation. That is a remnant. It has legacy phosphorus from a sewage treatment plant in that lake. So. But there is positive. There is improvements on the eastern side of the lake. So how does Lake Minnetonka and the rest of the watershed impact Minnehaha Creek? Similar graph to what I showed you before, but this is now phosphorus loading on Minnehaha Creek. The stream stations are below the bars, and then the management unit names are below that. You'll see the similar trend where you had that pulse of phosphorus in 2014, and then 2016 is just slightly above the 10-year average. And as you move from Grays Bay Dam to Hiawatha Falls, phosphorus increases. So this is a map of our monitoring stations along the Minnehaha Creeks of watershed. First I want to point out, talk about the chain of lakes. The Minneapolis Parks and Recreation Board, they collect the data. They manage lakes. So we just analyze it. We've been seeing that Cedar Lake and Lake Hiawatha have some trends in degradation, but Cedar is in clarity and Hiawatha is in phosphorus. The Hiawatha one is most likely that the alum treatment is starting to fail. It's a really minute change in degradation. It's a minute degradation trend. So like really small increases in phosphorus we're seeing over time. So we in the Park Board are not worried, but that's something that we're going to be having to address probably in, I don't know, 10 years or so. Improvements, there are actually improvements in the chain of lakes. Isles and Nokomis have seen statistically significant improvements. And Nokomis, it's in chlorophyll and phosphorus. And why that's really exciting is because we did biomanipulation in the fish community in Nokomis to improve water quality, and we're seeing that over time.
Good.
So that's great. So now to the stream. This table up here shows phosphorus concentrations and sediment concentrations. And why it says 10 years and 11 years, that's the range I ran the stats on. So 2005 to 2015 is 10 years, 2005 to 2016 is 11 years. What I want to point out is phosphorus concentrations have been improving across all of our stream stations. And sediment concentrations are improving at the Grays Bay Dam and then Excelsior Boulevard downstream. Why Excelsior Boulevard? Could it be that we did remeandering? So we wanted to look at the data before we did the remeanders and then after. So the data before, let me back up. We have a stream station right off the map. It's at Excelsior Boulevard. So it's just downstream of the remeanders. So before the data range was 99 to 2009, and then after was 2010 to 2012. That's the first remeander was online. And then 2010 to 2016 is the second remeander. So that's the range of data I assessed. What we found is that total phosphorus and soluble phosphorus, which drives algae, is significantly decreased. So before and after. So after the remeanders, we saw a decrease in phosphorus as well as soluble phosphorus. And so it shows the salt. Soluble phosphorus graph is the same graph. This is huge because during the first remeander, we had the 2011 flood. During the second, we had the 2014 flood, and then now we have the 2016 wettest year on record. So even with high water flowing through these remeanders, we were able to decrease phosphorus in the system. Well, plus, we also put online this storm treatment pond as well, which I can't factor in. It's just factored into the data. I can't break that piece apart. Second exciting thing is sediment. Although it's not statistically significant, there's no, in terms of before and after, it is decreasing. We are seeing that decrease. So in maybe 2 to 3 years, maybe 5 years, we'll see a significant trend. Most likely because of the high water years, a lot of sediment coming through, and that the second remander is still establishing.
Good stuff.
Thank you. So in terms of impairments, we have 28 lakes that are impaired in our watershed district. Those are in the red. And you can see the creeks that are impaired in red as well. Of the impaired lakes, in orange, there are 5 that are actually starting to meet the standards. So the state, the MPCA, the district can request the state to delist these lakes if we have enough years of data to show they're actually meeting the standards. And 4 of those 5 could be delisted. Hiawatha is on that list, but it only has met the standard in 2016. And then, unfortunately, though, we have 6 lakes that are not impaired, yet do not meet the standards. So in 2020, they most likely will be evaluated for listing. And again, those lakes are South Winston. Unfortunately, there's some really small lakes. South Winston, Church, Priest, Thieves, Pamela, and Powderhorn. So, pretty throughout the district. With that, I'll take any questions.
That's awesome.
Lake of the Isles, you mentioned was getting better. What's causing that? Contributing to
Couldn't
that?
tell you.
Okay.
I just know the change is really small. So the is improving, but it's small.
Is Cedar also improving?
No,
Because that's up where the pond work was done, right?
I can tell you, I'd have to get back to you because Clarity is definitely has a significant trend in decline, but the other parameters may be improving, it should not be statistically significant. I can't remember off the top of my head. So maybe is my answer for that.
Okay.
So. And I work with the park board, I make sure I convey these answers with the Chain of Lakes to them, so they always have some good reason, like, oh, the algae treatment's failing, or there's something else that I'm not aware of, so it's always good anecdotal information.
On Dutch Lake,
Yes.
is this reduction in phosphorus perhaps because of the iron sand filter? I don't know where that fits in the map.
1 second. I don't have to show you.
That's about, what, 4 years old or something?
I don't think so, because the iron sand filter is on the inlet,
Okay.
and what I'm showing you is on the outlet, but again, don't hold me to that, I can't
It's
say
So
for
it's a Dutch
sure.
Creek, not a Dutch Lake.
Yeah, so the sand iron filter is up here, going into, before it goes into the lake.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing is a decrease coming out of the lake. But as we investigate, planning has asked us the question, like, well, then why is it getting worse or why is it getting better? We don't know, we have to do some investigation.
Langdon's surrounded, that's another one you mentioned, in
Mhm.
Mound. It's surrounded by old sewer treatment
Yep.
ponds,
Right here,
right?
yeah.
And those have been decommissioned,
Mm-hmm,
like up at Long Lake.
mm-hmm,
And I think over time, you'll see less
mm-hmm.
of a problem coming out of Langdon.
Most likely, yeah. They're not supposed to be connected, but it probably is.
Interesting, thanks.
When was the alum treatment done in Hiawatha?
Ooh, I would want to say it was prior to 2000 or just around 2000. I have that information in my email, I just don't have it on hand.
And who paid for it?
I want to say it was a partnership between us and the park board, but don't hold me to that as well. So. Right around 2000 is when there was a lot of alum treatments done in the Chain of Lakes. So, not 2000, it was like 95. It was, sorry, I don't have the email. But I can get you that information if you really want it.
No, that's fine. And School Lake and the others in that chain, how deep are they?
Oh, good question. Let me get that.
There you go.
Wolfsfield is deep. School and Krieg, we believe, are shallow. And this one up here is also called School. So that's a funny thing. There's both School, but one's called School Swamp, one's called School Miller. Don't ask. But that's something we're also investigating because that drains into School Miller, the L-shaped one that's impaired. And there's a golf course to the west here that flows into a wetland that flows into School. So we think there's some impacts. And there's known agricultural impacts to School Miller as well. So, and we've heard anecdotal information that carp go up to Krieg, but nothing's been seen up further than that. So we've got some work to do. So. Any other questions? Quickly, I know this is a long presentation, so whiskey will be hopefully exciting. So in 2016, January of 2016, the Board of Managers approved the purchase of the whiskey data management system. Because before that, we were using Excel spreadsheets and doing things by hand or in Excel or in paper. We needed something that allowed us to be more time efficient, organized, and gave us more powerful tools to do analysis. So with that, I've been promising you to come back with what it looks like and what it can do. And then I had adopted a baby, and then that threw everything off. So, so now I'm back. We store our data in the system by sub-watershed. So those are our 11 sub-watersheds. And if you were to click on one, you'd see all the stations. So Christmas Lake is just one example. Minnetonka has over 30 stations. And when then you click on a station, you get the years of data collected for the station. So right now, all of our lakes have about 10 years of data. Some of them that's all they have. Some of them have up to 40 years of data. So we've got some things to do. We got some work to do. We have all that data, nothing's been lost in the transfer to the new system. We just want to make sure it's accurate. We've been finding in some of the historic data that the TP has been mixed up with stations. So one station has someone else's TP, another station has, so we want to make sure it's accurate. So I'm hoping by the end of this year, if not early by next year, like for example, Vizetta Bay will have 1974 to 2016. So that's my hope. So with that, I want to quickly show you some of the analysis.
How do you import that data?
It's through Excel, and there's an import button, pops it in.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, it's pretty easy. So I'm going to show you how I did some of the analyses that I presented here tonight. So this right-hand column gives us all our tools, and there's a vertical profile graph. So this is just a snapshot of what PV Lake temperature profile looks like, and it's showing that it's stratified. And then this is Crystal Bay in 2016. So the April profile showing the lake is still mixed, where the May one is showing it's stratified. This is more anecdotal. This is more not anecdotal, but this doesn't go into analysis. This is more going to diagnostic. If we see some things going on, if we want to see if there's internal loading, this will help us with that. So another tool is the statistics wizard. I can access any lake, any stream. I can do all lakes and all streams. I can just choose one if I want. And I can look at all the parameters. But for determining impairment, to determine if a lake is meeting impairments, I look at chloride, chlorophyll, phosphorus, and Secchi. And then I get output like this, and it's literally in the matter of 5 minutes, maybe less, depending on how many water bodies I select. So I get the raw data, I get the count, the mean, and the max and min. And the mean is what I use to determine if the lake's meeting impairments. Why is this important is that it used to take me in Excel about a week to do all the lakes throughout the whole watershed. I can do this in 5 minutes. That's huge time savings for staff.
Huge.
And I don't have to worry about human error. Where in Excel I would worry about human error. This takes that out.
Sweet.
Last thing is loading. So all the phosphorus loads that I showed you that were in the Lake Minnetonka and Minnehaha Creek, we're still not quite fully moved into Whiskey with this. We're working on that. So for 2016, we still did in Excel. But what's awesome about Whiskey is that it gives us this testing area. So you can see Dooley training. That's one testing area. But we use the water quality example. So it allows us to play with things to make sure it actually works and it matches what we've been getting in Excel so we can transfer and then we can push it to the whole system. But one of the examples is this is what loading would look like when it works. And then we take this, add it up, and that would be our annual loading for that station for the year. So with that, I want to thank all our partners as well as the staff for the research and monitoring program. They did a tremendous job during 2016 when I was gone on maternity leave. So I could not be where I am with Whiskey without them, and we couldn't have been here tonight. I couldn't have been here tonight without them as well. So with that, thank
What's
you.
the logo right under Capital Region?
That would be the MPCA.
Oh.
And just another plug for Whiskey is that CAP Region, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the MWMO have Whiskey. And then the newest knowledge that I have is that the DNR as well as the MPCA are considering to buy it.
All right.
As well as Met Council. So,
Let's be a big standard. Wow.
any questions? So my next update about Whiskey will be when we have all the data in it and when we learn some new tricks because it is a learning curve.
Thank you. That was a good purchase.
Nice job, Kelly. Cheers. I've never seen this.
Bill, my provider managers. The next item on the agenda is the committee structure update, and this kind of resulted. There's a memo in front of you today that was kind of a follow-up from a discussion at a PPC meeting in the end of April, And then there's been some subsequent discussions too, just about how we structure ourselves, why we structure ourselves the way we do, and if there's any opportunity to look for some either kind of course corrections or just to kind of make the kind of current trends to be a little bit more official. So in terms of the chart here, a few years ago in 2013, with help, I believe, from the folks at Himley Rapp, there's a structure put together to identify a streamlined committee structure because this organization had several committees, I understand, for a lot of different issues. And so it was broken down into just 3 standing committees, and then there were additional ad hoc committees and task forces and liaison committees as needed. So it was the Executive Committee, the Operations and Programs Committee, and the Planning and Policy Committee. And those were to feed into the board workshop that then would feed into the board meeting at the end of the month, and there's kind of a cycle and a flow of information. That's kind of somewhat changed over time. We've kind of shifted to having 2 regular board meetings, two board meetings every month, the second and fourth Thursday of the month. We still call the one on the second Thursday, the workshop, and then we still have done a little bit less of board action at that meeting and saved more board action to the final meeting. But in some cases, just to be if it's timely or something that needs more rapid attention, that the board has increasingly kind of looked at taking board action on things at the first board meeting of the month too. Do you have a question?
Do you mind? Just
Yeah.
a clarifying
Oh, no, yeah.
question. Is there something in your enabling legislation as to why you're labeling it board meeting and then board workshop? Or do you just have one board meeting identified a month, or is there any rationale or history behind that? Or
I don't think there is.
Okay.
I think it's just semantics and what things were called at the time when the committees were kind of structured.
Okay.
I think that,
Okay.
and at the end of the little memo here, it kind of shows what other watershed districts do, and most of them don't have committees, and most of them have 1 meeting a month.
Right.
So it's kind of depending on kind of the need and the scope and scale of the work that we do, that we've kind of tried to divide things out. I don't think if legal counsel can correct me if I'm
State law
misspeaking.
requires you to have 1 meeting a year.
So we exceed the
We
state
are
law.
exceeding expectations.
We're above average.
It doesn't, it's not very helpful
Okay.
in terms of providing structure. But the workshop versus, board action type meeting is an
internal construct. yeah,
well-used
yeah.
structure. It's pretty common, and workshop meant to just talk through
No
things
formal
more,
action.
and then staff goes back and
Yeah.
works on it and brings it back for what's usually quicker approval because it's been discussed.
So things would proceed from the workshop to then be on the consent agenda or something, just kind of for the board action at the following meeting and other discussion if there's new information or any questions. I think the committee structure has been a little bit less clear than that process. So we had the policy and planning committee and the operations and program committee. And I think that operations committee and its original purpose has kind of morphed over time to focus on some structural and budget issues. And in recent years, in my time here in the last few years, or last 2.5 years, that's been focused primarily on budget and kind of those operationalizing some of the things that come out of the planning and policy perspective. We've also had a lot of joint committee meetings, and in fact, the PPC meetings have basically become joint committee meetings because they're attended for the last 1.5 to 2 years, especially since we launched into the comprehensive plan development process and also the district's strategic plan process. We've had nearly unanimous, or all managers have attended most meetings. So that's kind of changed a little bit. So one of the potential recommendations would be to look at how we're meeting right now and maybe tweak the times a little bit so that they're more efficient and effective for your time. But to maybe look at an opportunity to have 2 meetings a month, the second and fourth Thursdays, and look at the time that those start, kind of related to that, and then have some sort of a work session or work meeting, committee meeting prior to those meetings that would be somewhat of a committee of the whole that could address any topics that arise rather than have those delineated into the PPC and OPC. And that's kind of a little bit the way we've been operating in the recent months or past couple of years anyway. And then I think that the executive committee and any other ad hoc committees or liaison committees and things could function as they do currently. And this, I think I've discussed this a couple of times with President White, and I think just trying to streamline the process is good. This isn't on here for board action this evening. It's a staff update, but I wanted to get this in front of you so that I know that when this has come up in committee meetings, there's kind of some discussion and back and forth on the merits or the pros and cons of doing different changes and making that kind of the current way we do things. But none of this is written in stone. We can change and make it more efficient.
Okay, so there would be committee-like functions without official committees. Heavy on the workshop night, less so on the board night. And the executive committee would still meet as always. Interesting.
I was thinking this would be, we'd have 2 board meetings, whatever we call them.
Yep.
And we could, as needed, have work sessions before them. It would be
General.
committee of the whole.
Committee of the whole, yeah.
I really like your suggestions.
And the times would shift also.
Yeah, I think some managers had said, the 4:30 and the 6:45. I'm not sure what the history on some of those things have been, but I think that if we shifted the committee meetings or the work sessions to start at 5 or 5:30 and then have the board meeting start at 7, I think that seems to make sense.
Yeah, 'cause there's been a Herculean amount of work that these folks have been doing for this new structure, and that should come to an end pretty quick here.
Yeah, and I will say that also since we shifted a little over a year ago to have, we used to meet every Thursday, basically, by having committees on the off weeks, the 1st and 3rd instead of the 2nd and 4th. And since we shifted that, that's been a tremendous benefit to just kind of the efficiency of staff time in terms of putting together board materials and packets and loading and all that kind of stuff has been greatly improved. And I think that's probably improved the efficiency of your time too.
Okay.
And there's a sort of a curiosity in the way the schedule works, is that you can sometimes actually take a 2-week vacation in between.
That's a good thing.
That works.
That's true.
Speaking of which,
I just did.
Lars, I think your information on what other metro watersheds are doing is very telling. We are on the overachieving end of meetings compared to them. So I strongly support your recommendation. I think it removes some confusion to just call both the meetings board meetings. That's what you're using them
Yeah.
as. I think there's a little bit of confusion if you call it a workshop, then you shouldn't be taking action at it.
Right.
And if you are, just call it a board meeting.
And I think typically, I guess this is kind of just the past practice too. We've had our board meetings recorded and then shared for the public, and we have not done that for the work session or committee type meetings. And all of them are open to the public, so that they're all public meetings, so the public can attend any of them. But I think that there is some benefit to having kind of a little bit less formality in terms of the process and procedures in the kind of that work session format.
Yeah, your first suggestion that they both be called board meetings and that time be moved to 7, I think just really cleans and clarifies. So I support that strongly. And then the work sessions, you could certainly leave them before both, or say it always would be with one and the second one would be optional type of thing.
Yeah.
And for me personally, the 5 or 5:30 would be really helpful. Just from, downtown traffic.
Yeah, I know that for
sources.
some other managers too, that it's the regular thing. They're fighting traffic to get here at the 4:30 start time, so.
So I strongly support those.
And then we could call it a work session if we met beforehand rather than a workshop.
whatever.
Yeah, because my county refers to those earlier, they have the regular meetings, but they always refer to the workshops.
Workshop?
Yeah, workshop is where you hash things out and then you move it to the meeting.
Does anyone have a strong feeling of whether you schedule those once a month or before both board meetings?
Or as needed.
In terms of notice, I mean, the board, the web can say as needed, and then each week a person would notice them.
The board meetings would be noticed, but the committee workshops would be as needed, but they'd have to be published if we need one.
I would recommend you keep at least one before your
As a
regular board-
standing,
as a
kind of regular,
standing,
yeah.
So that once a
But
month
those
you have a
agendas
workshop.
those agendas are published,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A board manager's board meeting, the regular meeting of the board, is a schedule that's usually made at the beginning of the year. And then notice-wise, you're pretty well done, and you can do whatever you want on those agendas. So items can come on last minute, and there's downsides to that, but from an open meeting law perspective, you can add things, you can take things off, you can deal with something that comes up. Special meetings, you have to say 3 days in advance what is going to be talked about, and you can't just freestyle on that. So there's some benefit to saying if you're going to have a structure where you think you're going to have a workshop at least once a month, schedule them at the beginning of the year and cancel them when you don't need them. And then schedule your board meetings, call them regular meetings, and cover your business on them, and again, cancel them when you don't need them.
And I would hope that if we put it on the schedule, 2 work sessions or workshops, that we wouldn't feel obligated to fill those times, so we would obviously cancel readily if we
Fair
need
enough.
business.
And I think there are some times of the year when we're coming into kind of budget work plan time. Certainly we use them a lot in the terms of the strategic planning effort where we kind of doubled up on the PPC joint committees last fall. So I think there's some times when it's useful to have those extra meetings, but to your point, I think we shouldn't have them just for the sake of having them.
And then just a side point, typically in a general workshop, your president presides over the meeting just as you would in one meeting. There's no
Committee
separate
chair.
committee chair. Is typically, I guess.
Yeah.
Or is that how you would see this?
I mean, I think that's for the board to determine how that would be governed or presided over. You know, I've seen like I think kind of a county has kind of different people are chairs, but it's a committee of the whole, so they kind of rotate through. And I think we've had kind of multiple chairs for the committees, just as a kind of way to divide and conquer a little bit in terms of who's working things. But if they're basically a committee of the whole, it makes sense to have the president preside.
And the vice president.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the
or yeah,
president's
yeah,
absent,
yeah.
right.
For a period of time, we actually rotated the board meeting. Who presided over the board meeting?
That's
We
what's horrible.
took turns.
It was the workshop one.
Was it the workshop one?
I think it was. I think it was just the first meeting. I don't remember for sure.
Yeah, because that was a bit, we all got to practice our Robert's rules, so. That's a long time ago though.
Thanks for bringing up good ideas.
And just as a point of information, a lot of these watershed districts have 5-member boards, and so it isn't
Right.
fine.
So a committee would be harder to have yeah.
So I think this is helpful to know, but not,
And different levels of budget and a lot of differences to our organization too.
so I guess we would like to see this brought forward as a formal proposal.
Okay.
Okay, consensus on that. Thank you.
The 1 meeting a month program, especially where you have a 9-member board, those meetings tend to be exceedingly long and of diminishing effectiveness as they go on.
It's 2 hours.
2 hours, nothing. 3, 4. I was at one last night that lasted till 10 o'clock. Started, and this board used to have those too. And they're very difficult for permit matters too, regulatory matters, because people have to wait and there's a big push. This is a much more efficient structure.
Was that Norway?
Yeah, that was Erdal Valley.
Let us see it again.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was
Erdal
Erdal Valley in Opstrein, Norway,
Is that where the name comes
where
from?
my grandfather left before he
Wow.
came to the United States. And this is on my dad's side of the family. And just right around the bend, was where, so that was my great-grandfather. My grandmother was born kind of just around the corner on the lake shore there. It's a lake that feeds into a fjord in Stryn, Norway.
So we didn't leave because he didn't like the scenery.
No,
Right.
no. Yeah.
That's why.
And those were electric fences that were there because we had hiked up to where they have the summer pasture for the livestock. So
Not for your safety.
they weren't for that. It's not a railing. That's electric. Yeah.
Keeps the kids together.
Yeah, from there to Blue Earth. So it's the fields were quite a bit bigger in Blue Earth area, and the
Mountain smaller.
the topsoil goes a little deeper.
I can see Viking ships coming around the corner.
My relatives there have found artifacts that are now in the museum in Bergen that of a Viking sword that they kind of unearthed underneath some stones and some things. So and then also an axe head. So that are from around 1100. So it's kind of cool.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. That's my trip report.
Madam President, could I ask, this might not be the right spot to ask, but is there, it seems like kind of a governance discussion, is there an opportunity to get a financial presentation quarterly scheduled?
Yeah,
You know, the first quarter isn't really all that
Yeah.
exciting, but second, third, and fourth quarter are pretty important. And I know we get a monthly, but I think just for the public's sake and my sake, a quarterly report that's presented at the meeting would be, I think, really helpful for me.
Yeah, I think you had sent an email about that not too long ago, and that was one of my kind of surprises when I joined the organization, that's not a more regular part of regular board meetings, to look at kind of the budget and the status of the budget going forward on a regular basis to check.
Call it the carryover report.
Well, yeah, we kind of get into the developing the budget, but we're not necessarily the reporting on the current year's budget as much. So I think that if the board would like to see something like that on a quarterly basis, I think that would be, to your point, to Manager Loftus, I think that would be beneficial for staff, for the board, for the public, to kind of have kind of that running status report of where we are on the annual expenses.
Are you looking for a report that we just put in the agenda or a
No,
presentation?
I want someone to come and
Present.
break it down in 6 slides in 10 minutes and tell us
So
tell us we're
yeah,
on board and there's no problems and there's nothing to worry about.
And
And they should come every 3 months. And then at the end of the year, when everything went perfectly, you'll say, well, yeah, we knew. Yeah. And if in the third quarter things are looking scary, then everybody's on top of it and concerned and making adjustments quickly. And I just feel like that's probably one of our fiduciary responsibilities, to have the monthly report doesn't give me any comparison to budget or a lot of context. So I don't need it monthly, just a quarterly.
Yeah. And I think sometimes there's some
Thumbs
timing
up.
issues or some kind of that cash flow things that maybe are explanations for why things might be above or below, but those are the types
Yeah.
of things that we should highlight.
The green letters versus the red letters.
Yeah, kind of a dashboard approach,
Yeah,
kind of.
it doesn't need to be super in-depth.
Our governance
Just to
policy
cover us a
actually
little
say
bit.
there'll be a quarterly financial report to the executive committee, but there was
Oh.
never anything exciting to say, so we sort of stopped.
Do you get that
doing
then already?
it. We stopped doing it because
Oh.
there was really,
There's nothing
but
there.
I have no problem with, this is just an administrative decision.
Well, then it could be 2 slides instead of 6. We're on budget.
I got no problem.
A green slide or a red
Yeah.
slide?
You're fine.
No, I think that's a good idea.
Green but headed toward red.
Madam Chair, Lars, what do you currently look at on a monthly basis?
We have we do receive from our accounting firm kind of a monthly summary of where we are compared to budget in all the different budget categories across the organization. So we get some summary information of that too. So we can just kind of compile some of that information in a way that I think answers kind of the questions of how we're spending our resources and how close we are to what was budgeted to.
And it's laid out by program?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean this to create more work for you. Is it not within the scope of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
person doing our
Yeah, I think that
finances
we already get much of that from Nancy
Okay.
in the files that she gets. I think that goes to all of you, I believe. If not, we should address that too. Okay, then just in terms of the administrator's report, first I wanted to kind of have a little bit of an update and get some discussion and direction for the HR plan progress. About 2 weeks ago now, I believe it was, there was a meeting with our HR consultant and a few of the managers and also our legal counsel to talk about and define some of the key points and direction going forward. That was when I was out of town. And then there's also a timeline that was developed that included the submission of an updated final report. And then also, since the consultant was going to be out of town this weekend for this meeting on the 13th of July, timing for there to possibly be scheduled a presentation by the consultant, whether that's at a special meeting to be scheduled or if that would be part of the already scheduled meetings. So I'd like to kind of get some feedback from and direction from the managers on that. In the meantime, staff have been already having discussions to talk about some of the changes and potential changes in HR structure and kind of processes internally, which I think have been very useful and productive. One of the suggestions from the managers that we were asked to consider was folding the research and monitoring functions into the planning department, and I know that those 2 staff groups have been meeting to talk about some of the options and the pros and cons of those options in a pretty direct and constructive manner. So I think that we've already made some progress on that on an internal perspective, in addition to kind of having the consultant's perspective shared. So I think in terms of some of the next steps, I think it would be useful for the consultant to present the report to the board, and then for staff to continue working on crafting the integrated work plan process so that what happens in the human resources plan comes together. Some of those things will need to be prioritized for an implementation plan that would be, some might be more immediate or short term, some that would be implemented in the 2018 budget, and maybe some that even longer term beyond the 2018 budget, so we can kind of prioritize and put together a timeline for those two. And I think, although it's already the middle of July now, I think we're in a pretty good position to have that fairly well defined by the end of the month, like we talked about at our last meeting, so that we can make some progress in terms of better understanding how we're going to structure our human resources in a strategic way that focuses on kind of the highest and best use of our resources that are focused on our strategic priorities. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about kind of some of those next steps or timeline for a presentation for the consultant, or what your thoughts might be on that. But
I think it would be really important for that consultant presentation to include both alternate structures. Right now, I saw a preliminary report to that effect in our liaison group that shows basically what we have today with one box changed. But if you're going to do what you were talking about earlier and show what it would look like under, folding the research and monitoring in, I'd like to see what that structure would look like in that new picture.
In a new kind of visual org chart format.
With a director and then sub-managers,
Mhm.
because those are all new positions. And I didn't see any of that structure in that preliminary one.
I would agree with that.
There was an item that kind of came up at our last meeting that I'm not being able to completely recollect, but there was a sort of an action item that addressed the HR group report, and it was, boy, I don't know how to say it exactly, but it just, I need to get back into my notes to see what it was that we were going to expect an action on this month.
Was it about the HR?
Yeah.
Was it basically that one of the options to be examined was?
Yeah, it was like
Rolling in.
2 weeks time, you know, we were supposed to get a meeting from the HR
Yeah,
people.
the liaison team did get that,
Okay.
but it's incomplete.
Oh,
And that's what our frustration is that
yeah.
we had a meeting to discuss it. We had the attorney articulate the 5 or 6 items we wanted to have accomplished. And then when the report came out, it wasn't complete. And it missed item number 1. So that was our frustration.
Right, and I think some of those things were further addressed in the absence of 3 of you when you were up at we talked about that at the PPC committee meeting now 3 weeks ago, I guess, since that
Right.
meeting was, so.
But I do think that Laura's proposal is on track time-wise to what we originally laid out in terms of coming back with some alternatives.
Mhm.
And so if you get it done, we'll be on time.
Thank you.
Anything else?
One of the items that at the PPC meeting was the group was fine with me reaching out to Ann to try and get up to date because I was a bit behind the curveball. And I did get the draft report, so thank you for sending me that. I did reach out to her on June 28th. I haven't heard back.
Okay.
So I didn't want you to think that I hadn't done that because I have reached out to her trying to set up a meeting.
I think
And maybe it sounds like she was meeting with you folks, so maybe there was a reason behind it.
She was
But
going on vacation.
it was the 28th, I think, when she met with you folks. I don't know if that was by telephone or not. I was out of town, but I think that Lewis had sent a kind of a summary follow-up email the following day after that. So
We were at Smith Partners.
but I think as far as my next step, I'll try to reconnect with her. She's out of town this week, and I'll ask her also to kind of see if there's a time that the two of you could meet, if that would be helpful, because
you know what's really helpful for me at this point is I think Manager Becker said we were close to on our timeline, but I think we're probably a month originally behind from where we hope to be, right?
Well, more
So
like
I
about
think-
9 months behind
Right.
where we originally hoped to be. But
So I do think the July meeting is really important.
Yeah.
And my one request would be to get a copy of her final report
yeah, well in advance of
at
that, right? Yeah.
least
Yeah.
2 to 3 days ahead of
Yeah.
time. I personally
Yeah.
struggle with the memos at meetings.
Yeah.
I just think it's bad form. And it's almost impossible to have people reading while
Casual-
other things are going
A
on.
casual 20-page read.
So it might
While
be
you're presenting.
yeah, well, so I did read her draft report, and you're right, it's, lacking. So if that would be my one request is, that's 2 weeks from now, which means, she needs to have it to you by X date,
Right.
right? To distribute it the day before. So if I would like to read the whole thing.
Yep.
At least a day or two before
Ideally,
the
it's in the
meeting.
packet.
Yeah. Right. It
That'd
would.
be
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah. That would make me feel a bit more prepared for it. I mean, I feel like maybe talking to her would be helpful, but honestly, just
Okay.
she doesn't have a lot of time to finalize this probably if she's been on vacation, and so just getting the report to you on time for distribution on time would be great. We're setting the bar low.
Sounds good.
Anything else on this item?
The other thing is, I just wanted to kind of highlight, I know that President White received an email about 25 by 25, the governor's initiative to have kind of a series of town hall style meetings across the state to look at improving water quality by 25% by the year 2025. And so I just wanted to highlight that for you, and I'd be happy to forward this to all of you, but there's meetings in Rochester, Mankato, Marshall, Crookston, St. Cloud, Ely, Bemidji, Minneapolis, Burnsville, and Stillwater that start the end of this month and go through the 5th of October. And each one of these also have kind of an informational packet connected with them that have a fair amount of information specific to different regions that the meetings are held in. And I know that the the district administrators are looking for ways to make sure that watershed districts across the state can be sure to plug into and participate in some of these meetings. So I think this was a good opportunity for an organization like MAUD to elevate its presence and visibility to make sure that people are aware of what watershed districts are focusing on in the state.
Which one are you going to?
I think probably the one on Minneapolis, which is on September 26th. The following day is going to be a district administrators meeting up in Fergus Falls, I believe, but I think that'll work out. So.
Okay.
And I can forward this email to people if they're interested in that as well.
And then those links to all those reports,
Yep.
that's great.
Yeah. And also, I know that Catherine Sylvia in our permitting department sent an email yesterday about Met Council Environmental Services Project update. When I started at the district, it was a very well-attended meeting with lots of people from the Coldwater Springs to talk about the tunnel change and things. And so I think that you all had seen the update on the project. That's no longer going to be a replacement. It's going to be a renovation of the tunnel rather than a new tunnel. So that project has changed significantly. A few updates from education and communication. One is that if you caught any of the coverage yesterday, it was a good news day for our process and our study with the University of Minnesota for the Bellinger treatment study that's going on and starting. There's a kind of a media event out at Lake Minnetonka Regional Park. The local TV stations, especially KARE 11 and Fox 9, did some nice coverage on it. And I even noted, and I forwarded to, if you Google search the district, and you get the alerts that the San Francisco Chronicle even carried the story. So I don't know exactly how that got picked up in San Francisco, but that story got around a little bit. And also, like President White already mentioned, the nominations for Watershed Heroes are coming up. So if you have thoughts on that, please make sure that we get those incorporated into the list. And there's an invitation that went out from Telly Mamayak today to participate in some of that planning process coming up too. And also that couple cleanup events on July 23rd at the Greenway coming up, and these are on your desk in front of you, and also on August 19th at Lake Hiawatha. If you like more of these, there's a few more of them on the table here too if you want to kind of share that. And my last update is kind of related to the City of Orono and the Big Island Committee. Myself and another staff member were going to attend the meeting, the committee meeting on Tuesday afternoon. They had a pretty full agenda, and so I had been in touch with one of their council members who's kind of chairing that group, and we will attend their next meeting instead. And also, I think, have some kind of connection with them in between, just to do a little bit of testing in terms of where the boundaries of kind of what might be acceptable to our conservation easement and what might not. They're still and have been in kind of a brainstorming process, coming up with kind of every and all ideas, and so we haven't been directly involved in that process, but President White and I did meet with her council member Seals a couple months ago now, and just expressed our interest in the property and our history in the property and the management plan, and we would be not directly involved, but really watching to make sure that we protect the conservation easement that we hold on that property. So that continues.
How many of their meetings have you been to?
We have not
You
participated
didn't- oh, you
in
didn't
any.
go
No,
this
we
week.
didn't. We didn't go this week because they had kind of a full agenda, and I'd like to kind of pick some brains here too to just kind of talk about how to best plug into the process and when and to make sure that it's as productive and doesn't and reflects well on the district and doesn't get too far into kind of some of the local or sometimes political issues that they're working with too. So I'd be happy to get some advice from you on
Yeah,
some of those
sure.
things.
Lars, they're asking for our interpretation of what our conservation easement means.
Sort of. They don't really have their plans developed yet, so we've kind of expressed that we want to maintain the natural resource integrity of the property and make sure, and we've invested pretty significantly not only for the purchase of the property but also to improve the property in terms of the bank restorations and some of those types of things. So the stabilization projects. So and our staff have kind of monitored it on a regular basis also. So they have not asked for a specific interpretation of our conservation easement yet, but they have a copy of it in terms of the management plan, and so they have that information, and we just wanted to make sure that they knew that the kind of the rationale for the district's involvement with the project, the property and the project.
So I would be concerned that anything that we might come up with would set precedent or other conservation easements that are similarly defined.
Mm-hmm.
So be very careful.
Yeah. But we intend to be and conservative in terms of the conservation value there. I think there are some envelopes, that would allow some levels of development in the property where there had been some recreation and some things in the past. But I think we want to be very conservative in terms of any types of development that might take place.
I'm not sure what kind of, how the meetings have gone or what they talk about. I suppose I could look to see if they publish minutes or anything, or you'd mentioned that maybe a CAC member is a
member,
committee
yeah.
as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I don't have a good pulse on what their conversations are, but
What's their official name?
I believe they are the Big Island Committee for the city of Orono.
so my only fear is that you get a group of residents, or yeah, I guess it's mostly residents, right, who get really wonderful, grandiose ideas and get excited about them, and then in a year they come and present them to us, or whenever, some future date, right, and then we're the Debbie Downer.
Right.
You know, that isn't how we intended when the district spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to preserve this. That doesn't fit, and it never will. You take a lot of public interest and energy and enthusiasm and you kind of kill it or squash it, and that can be really frustrating for the residents who spent a lot of time in these meetings, and so
Are getting excited about stuff.
are
yeah,
getting
right,
excited or fundraising or whatever they happen to be doing. And maybe that's not our problem, but it feels like we might become
Then they
the
say,
blame
yeah.
at some point. I guess maybe that's an irrational fear, but that's where I see the path heading. And so I don't know how to prevent that, but I am interested in knowing what our options are and what the pros and cons of each of those options are. I don't know that they necessarily are legal, but maybe they are. You know, what are the legal options? Do nothing, say no when they come back. You know, I don't know. But I feel like sitting back in a reactive position isn't necessarily helpful to us either.
Okay. You know, I think they've had 4 meetings so far, and the way it's been described to me is they're still kind of in a brainstorming phase. And so I think they've actively avoided any kind of naysayers or in the process.
Sure.
And that's why we'd like to kind of plug in soon. And I think that I think they have monthly meetings. And I think before the next one, I'd like to connect with a few people with Orono, just to kind of make sure that we're all on the same page, which is kind of what President White and I had done before they started their meetings, actually. Just to kind of make sure that we were kind of, had to make sure their documentation was in hand and they had the information.
And you were asking for advice. I
Yep.
think a letter from our attorney is maybe a little cold, agency to agency, but getting in front of their group so that they hear directly from whoever is the most knowledgeable here on Big Island, the history, the issues, and where that the district strongly supports its preservation philosophy, and hearing that early rather than later is probably a presentation that we ought to request to give them and actually make sure they hear it directly instead of just, I think a letter can be impactful, but, or maybe it's both. Send them a letter, and then you say, I really want to get in front of your group. I really want them to understand us and where we're coming from, so that there's no misunderstanding about
Right.
where we're going.
Expectations, yep.
Does this group include the Three Rivers Parkland?
No, it doesn't.
Okay, so then we have one easement in their concern. We actually have two easements on Big Island, because we have the one with the Three Rivers Park, shoreline restoration. So we have two interests on Big Island.
Yeah, and I think Orono is just focusing, this is kind of an adjacent property, so they're just focusing on the property that we acquired with them. Well, I guess they acquired, but as part of that, we funded part of it in exchange for the conservation easement.
So, no one's ever mentioned that the board might have a role in this decision, a formal role. Does it?
In their committee?
In interpreting what's permissible under the conservation easement.
We had an attorney-client privilege letter from council. And we could send that around again.
Yeah, that was, I think, in late January, early February. Our legal counsel kind of put together, I believe that was you that did that, or was that one of your coworkers?
Yep.
I think that was you that put together kind of this is kind of the state of the situation. This is kind of the what our conservation easement means, and kind of some of the options to keep an eye on. And so I could certainly recirculate that letter too.
That would be helpful.
Why don't I do it so we can keep it attorney-client privileged?
Even better.
And that was before Manchilopoulos came on. So
Yeah.
I was just made a note.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yep.
you
And
can.
if even you could develop those options further as to knowing what you know now.
Right, and in
And
addition
where
to
the
that, I think a
committee is.
presentation at their upcoming meeting and making sure that it's part of the agenda instead of an add-on to the agenda. I
Why
think
are
that'd
they
be helpful.
publishing their minutes?
I'm not sure. They've shared the minutes from the prior meeting as part of an email chain with me, but I'm not sure if they're publishing them. I would think they're maintaining minutes of some sort, so.
Interesting. But I like your idea of getting engaged. It helps everybody.
And I understand the concept of keeping the attorney's letter privileged, but I don't have a problem expressing to them, you know, these are some of the things we see permissible in that, just to give them an example. So it's not that the watershed saying nothing fits, but, you know, this is how we see it, or,
Manage expectations.
yeah, managing expectations is really important and difficult.
And unless there's any other questions, that's all I have.
I noticed a date that's coming up, August 15th, the first bids will be open for the Green Line work. So that'll be interesting. It'll take them several months to work it out, I think.
Manager Becker had a question that I'll give a very brief answer to. Any change to the conservation easement would have to be approved by the managers.
meeting is adjourned.